How much NIL money did Ohio State football spend on their 2024 roster? Let's find out. So 24/7 put together this study, this assessment, whatever you want to call it, where they are ranging how much every player costs in the transfer portal. Now, they didn't just figure out how much these players cost once they enter into the portal, but they also tried to figure out how much does it cost to retain a player from going to the transfer portal. I found this study very interesting, and one of the first thoughts I had was, wow, will this give us any clarity into approximately how much Ohio State paid for their starting lineup and their transfer portal players in 2024? So, naturally, just as any Ohio State fan would, I went and I looked up every single returning starter for Ohio State. I looked up every single portal player, and I figured out exactly what the range would be for each one. So we're going to do that today, where we figure out how much each one of these players costs. Okay, so I have put together this list, all of our returning starters for Ohio State. I've put together this list with all of our portal players as well. And just to be generous, right, because we've heard all about how much money Ohio State NIL has and everything, just to be generous, I have gone with the max range. You can go back and check later on if you want to make sure I put it in right, but the max range of each one of these players. I figure at the end of the day, if there's some give and take here and there, it will at least be figured out later on. So if we go with the very first one, Travion Henderson, returning starter, he is going to be $300,000. If you go with Emeka Egbuka, he is also going to be $300,000 according to the highest paid range. Now, this is where it gets a little bit dicey. The O-lineman returning, I wouldn't think that you would spend the maximum cost on a Josh Simmons or Evan Jackson or Josh Fryer just because they weren't contending with the NFL, but we are talking about retention here, so let's go ahead and enter in the max range for them, which for an offensive lineman, 24/7 said is $500,000. We're going to enter it in for all three of these. Okay, now we get to the D-line. The max range for them was said to be $600,000. I think all of these guys are probably earning that, possibly more, but I think we're covering ourselves a little bit with going with the highest range for all these other guys. So we're going to go ahead and do $600,000 for Tyleik Williams, JT Tuimoloau, and Jack Sawyer. Now we get into the DBs: Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Davison Igbinosun, Jordan Hancock. Some of these guys, again, you're kind of figuring out how would they have gone to the NFL draft. Davison Igbinosun wasn't even able to. Lathan Ransom probably was in his best interest to come back, but we're still going to give them the highest range because who knows? Maybe they spent a little bit more on Denzel Burke to get him to go to the draft. Maybe they spent a little bit more on Jordan Hancock. Who knows? We're going to go ahead and give him the largest amount, which is $225,000. There we go. So if you look at returning starters altogether, if you max out every single returning starter that came back for Ohio State, you're looking at $4,800,000 that Ohio State NIL paid for all of their guys to come back, right? This is the one more year fun type of thing that gets talked about out there. Who knows if this number is completely exact, but I would like to believe that if Ohio State is paying out the money that they say they are, and this vibe that we're getting that Ohio State is just paying the highest price, they are not being outbid by anybody else, then this number has to be at least somewhere in the range of what we're seeing here. Okay, let's go over to portal players, and this is where it gets a little bit more interesting because we have two quarterbacks here, right? Well, as we said, we're going to go with the highest range, which for quarterbacks, $800,000. Now we've heard about $1 million here, $1 million there, all these different guys. Well, guess what? Maybe Will Howard made a little bit more. Let's just go ahead and give Julian Sayin the same $800,000. Now, the article did mention quarterbacks that were possibly paid more than this coming out of the transfer portal. Will Howard was not named as one of them. So I think the ones they named were Dylan Gabriel, Riley Leonard going to Notre Dame, some of those guys, but they were not one of them. Quinshon Judkins might be another one here that was possibly paid a little bit more. However, it seems like there was more than just money why Quinshon Judkins wanted to come, but regardless, his price tag would be $300,000. Interesting about Will Kacmarek, okay? Will Kacmarek comes from Ohio, was not a super highly rated transfer portal prospect, and at the end of the day, there is no tight end range in the range or the study, the assessment, whatever you call it. And so at the end of the day, he didn't even have a range, so zero. I guess maybe they just didn't pay him anything. Now I imagine they probably paid him something, but I don't have a good guess for what it would be if they don't put anything in there. So we'll go with zero and just hope that maybe us over going at the highest top of the range for these other guys will cover that. Seth McLaughlin, we're going to look at $500,000 there again for the offensive lineman. Caleb Downs, probably more than this, but just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and give Keenan Nelson Jr. the same one. All right, so if we look down here, we see that Ohio State spent just less than $3 million on their transfer portal players. They spent just less than $5 million on their returning starters, which gives you just less, actually just about $7.65 million spent on all of these players. Now, of course, some of these guys in here, you have Keenan Nelson Jr., not going to be starting most likely. Will Kacmarek might be starting. Doesn't look like it right now. Seems like G. Scott might be the guy. But then also over here, you have the offensive line guys. You have Carson Hinsman, most likely is going to be starting from what we're hearing. Could also be Luke Montgomery. Don't want to count him out, but it does sound like it might be Carson Hinsman. He was the one that started the spring game there. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is Ohio State could have spent $7.65 million on all of these players. Now, does that mean that they spent, $5,350,000 on the rest of the roster? I don't think so. If you spend just $7.65 million on all of these starters and all of these portal players, I find it hard to imagine you would pay it within $2 million of that for the rest of your roster. I suppose it's possible. Who knows? Maybe Ohio State's just paying out Jermaine Matthews Jr. Maybe they're paying out Carnell Tate. Maybe they're paying out Jeremiah Smith. Who knows what those other guys are paying out? But if we're looking at the roster and who's going to be starting for Ohio State and trying to figure out how much did Ohio State pay for their starting lineup and their transfer portal players to come in, based on the 24/7 study that John Talty did in trying to talk to the different NIL agents and the collective people, all those kind of things, this is the number that we come out to, $7.65 million. We'll see if that's actually correct. I guess we won't see if that's actually correct. We're not going to actually find out how much Ohio State spent. But if we're looking for some numbers based off a study that was just recently put out there, seems like this might be it. This was just something fun that I wanted to try and figure out. You let me know. Is there anything in here that you would change? Is there anything in here that you're like, no, JR, they definitely spent more money in this area? No, they definitely spent less money in this area. And do you think that this $7.65 million is accurate? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Let me know in the comments section. Let's see what everybody thinks. Would appreciate your thoughts. Have a good one, everybody.